I'm now going to call on Mehmat Aksoy to speak, and he got involved in political struggle as a student in London. He's been involved with the Kurdish freedom movement since 2004. He's taken very many different roles in his community. He's been a youth organizer, he's been a management committee member of the Kurdish Community Centre, and currently he's the public relations officer at the Halkavi Kurdish Community Centre, which is a lovely centre. You must visit it. So can I welcome you?
I'd like to continue from where my friend finished in terms of taking a chronological approach to the issue. I'm going to talk about the Kurdish freedom movement and the PKK especially, and their strategies for resistance. The PKK were formed in the early 70s as a student movement first, by a few students based in Ankara. And the first and the most important thing that they did was that they determined that Kurdistan, the land of the Kurds, was exploited both by the Turkish state, but also by international capitalist modernist powers. The few years of fermentation as students developed into the party, the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, in 1978. And this was seen as a development of the resistance movement from student to actual professional revolutionary struggle. The first armed resistance actually didn't begin against the state, but began against Kurdish landlords and collaborators, in the sense that these were the people that the Kurds could actually see as their oppressors on a day-to-day, face-to-face basis. So some of the Kurdish landlords and collaborators who were actually collaborating with the Turkish state and were actually MPs and the elites of the region were attacked by the PKK, and this in turn gained support from Kurdish workers and peasants, especially the Kurds being peasants at that time mainly. This gained PKK a foothold in Kurdish society. At the same time in 1978, the PKK formed Serkhwebun, which is, incidentally, means autonomy or independence. And it was formed to divulge ideology, culture, history, and the spirit of the PKK resistance. From 1978 to 1982, 4,000 PKK members or people associated with the PKK or suspected of being associated with the PKK, which most of them were actually not, were arrested and imprisoned during those 4 years, and especially on 12 September 1980, the day of the coup. But however, this attack by the state worked in the PKK's favor, and you will see this in the history of the PKK quite often, that they reverse the attacks of the state and turn it into pluses for themselves. The suicide of Mazlum Doğan, one of the PKK's founding members, on 21st of March, which is the Kurdish New Year, to protest against the inhumanity and torture of the Turkish state system. The self-immolation of the fours, who actually held hands and burnt themselves. The hunger strikes, which ended in the deaths of tens of people, meant that the PKK actually organized its first mass resistance at the heart of the Turkish state, inside Turkish prisons. Those that were released from there saw this, and most of them then went to the mountains and joined the PKK in its guerrilla war. At the same time, in the early 80s, solidarity was formed between a lot of socialist communist organizations under the banner A Joint Front Against Fascism. And most of these organizations were either in the Middle East, had left Turkey, their leaders had left Turkey, following the 12th September 1980 coup, which weakened the Turkish revolutionary movement, or the Turkish left, to a certain extent, but actually, as I said, worked in the PKK's favor. Guerrilla warfare against state forces actually began in 1984. It was supposed to begin in 1982, but because it kept on being put off, the PKK were actually made fun of by other organizations because they kept on putting their guerrilla warfare off. But the theory of the first bullet, which was actually developed by Frantz Fanon, as you will know, was also taken on board by the PKK, and armed propaganda brigades were formed to visit villages and to once again divulge ideology, culture through leaflets, through PKK publications. At the same time, the Kurdish movement began organizing in the diaspora. The coup in 1980 had meant that lots of Kurdish people and Turkish socialists had come to many countries in Europe, most prominently Germany, because of the workers' history there from the 70s. And they developed relations with other socialist movements and other nations and other oppressed peoples, NGOs, and even sometimes government officials. And we had stuff like the Kurdistan Report being published, and Peace in Kurdistan campaign, which developed here later on. The prominence of the PKK in Germany in the 80s actually made Germany take a stance against the PKK as well. And we can see here Germany's role in educating, equipping and sharing intelligence with Turkish security personnel from 1984 onwards. In fact, an ex-chief of police says that Germany had more info on the PKK than we did. We did not know anything about them. We thought they were just a bunch of looters. We didn't even take them seriously. And this was based on the Gladio, which we know is an organization formed by NATO to fight against subversive movements, especially the Soviet Union, from the 1950s onwards. So American involvement in actually educating Turkish counter-guerrilla organizations actually comes to the forefront, especially in the 80s. Also important in Germany were the Düsseldorf trials, where many leading PKK cadres were arrested. In fact, they built a special prison. But once again, this worked, or the organization made this work in the favor of its movement. Many German nationals met with the movement and joined the movement, and some even joined the armed struggle and were martyred. During the 80s, the PKK also made great use of music. Because Kurdish writing and Kurdish history, written history, was very weak, the PKK developed resistance through other means, and music was one of the most popular ones. Popular battles and martyrs were immortalized. Kurdish oral history and Kurdish history before the PKK was actually taken to the people. At the same time, the Turkish state, in an offensive, they implemented OHAL, which is emergency rule, in the second half of the 80s. And this was the first systematic terrorization of the Kurds during that period, the Kurdish people who were outside of Kurdish politics. The introduction of the village guard system, 200,000 at one point, was also part of the same plan to intimidate, soften and create conflicts between Kurds. So the village guard system was implemented amongst Kurds themselves. The village guards were Kurds who had been bought off by the state. This intensification of war also created internal erosion within the PKK, and the PKK began using more violent tactics. And many agents, secret agents, were found within the PKK. Towards the 90s, the PKK began organizing in trade unions, human rights organizations, universities and colleges. It was at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s that the PKK actually became a mass movement. And it was because it addressed the needs of its community, of its nation. As the movement began gaining support, Nevroz, which had actually been highlighted by the suicide of Mazlum Doğan, as I mentioned, he committed suicide on 21st of March, and he had shown his friends just before committing suicide 3 matchsticks which symbolized the fire of Nevroz. But in the early 90s, more people began self-immolating themselves. Rahshan Demiral was a woman who was only 17, who immolated herself in I believe, 1992. And Nevroz became a cause célèbre for the Kurds, much like everything else. So this was a cause that became a part of Kurdish identity. In 1992, over 100 people were killed in the region of Botan because they wanted to celebrate their new year. Mass mobilization of women also was on the agenda in this period. All female guerrilla groups were formed. The movement actively sought the participation of Kurdish women by beginning education and ideological initiatives based on gender equality. The importance of education in the PKK was evident from its inception as a form of resistance in itself. Öcalan's role in educating was crucial, and he gave classes for up to 12 hours a day. And this is essentially where Öcalan's power and his importance arises from. I have so much to say, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to have enough time. The PKK also became involved in active legal politics within Turkey. So they formed the People's Labour Party in 1990 and sent parliamentarians to the parliament. However, because they had spoken Kurdish and because of supposed affiliation with the PKK, they were bundled out and imprisoned, most of them. Newspapers such as Özgür Ülke, the Free Country, began publishing in Turkey to create an alternative media based towards the Kurdish and Turkish people. Dialogue had actually begun between the Turkish state and the PKK at one point in 1993 with Turkish Prime President Turgut Özal, who was actually part Kurdish himself, he later admitted. But however, he died in mysterious circumstances. And now it is pretty much evident that he was actually killed. Also killed at the same time were generals and other parliamentarians who wanted a solution, a peaceful solution to the Kurdish issue. But once again, the deep state, the Gladio, and international capitalist powers intervened. And from 1993 to 1997 onwards, 17,000 extrajudicial killings took place, mostly at the hands of Hezbollah Contra, which was a religious Kurdish movement funded by the state at that time. Implemented instead of President Özal was Tansu Çiller, who had no history in Turkish politics, was actually a CIA agent, an American citizen at the time, together with the Chief of Staff, Doğan Güreş, who, returning from England in 1992, actually said, England has given us the green light to go ahead and eliminate the PKK. This period ended in 1997 when Necmettin Erbakan also tried to begin a dialogue. However, once again there was intervention and he was toppled in a postmodern coup. So as you can see, anyone who touches the Kurdish issue or wants to resolve it, even if they're in power, they are eliminated pretty much easily. In 1995, Kurds formed Med TV, the first Kurdish TV station in history. Once again, this was done against, it was a part of the resistance and showed also the change in the PKK and the change in the times as well. Culture, ideology, the formation of a community in tune with its times was also important. But Turkish state pressure meant that Med TV its license was revoked. It formed another TV station, Medya TV, that was also revoked. Recently, the license of Roj TV has also been in question. However, each time the Kurds have formed a new channel, and this time, instead of 4 Roj TV, they've actually formed 2. So we say, the more the Turks oppress the Kurds actually come out stronger. In 1998, Öcalan, who had been staying in Syria, was ousted after Turkey threatened to attack Syria, and captured after an odyssey through Europe in which he visited many different European countries but was not allowed to remain in any of them. In a joint operation by the CIA and Mossad, he was captured in Kenya. Öcalan wanted to turn his foray into Europe into an opportunity, and the slogan he used was, "We went to Kurdistan and became a party, we went to the Middle East and became a people's movement, and now we are going to Europe to become a state." However, obviously this didn't work as he had imagined. When Öcalan was captured, over 100 Kurds immolated themselves. Most died. Kurds attacked the embassies of all the countries involved in the international conspiracy, so from Israel to Germany to Russia and Italy, Greece. 3 Kurds were shot and killed at the Israeli embassy in Germany. Öcalan's resistance against capitalist modernity after he was caught developed, and he prevented a civil war between Turks and Kurds through his actions. Since 1993, he had been trying to find an alternative solution to the Kurdish issue through non-statist or leaving nationalist and nation-statist ideology and praxis. And this developed at İmralı, the island prison where he has been kept for 13 years. The PKK declared a unilateral ceasefire and moved over the border into northern Iraq, but were placed on the prescribed terrorist list in 2002, despite not engaging in terrorist activity or supposed terrorist activity for 3 years. So the most peaceful time of the PKK was actually when they were placed on the terror list, which is funny. Öcalan developed a 4-tier defense in prison. The only way he could communicate was through his defense. So the first one was the declaration of a democratic solution to the Kurdish issue. So he wanted arms to be left and arms to be abandoned. Then it was from the Sumer pre-state to the Democratic Republic. He said that nation-statism and statism was directly connected to capitalism, capitalist exploitation. So for the Kurds to be a free nation, they would have to leave this mentality of a nation-statist mentality and have to look for alternative solutions to the Kurdish issue, which is now called democratic autonomy, and it is an inverted pyramid. So that at the moment, the Kurds are at a point where they have actually once again negotiated with the state on a resolution to the Kurdish issue with the current AKP government. However, they have not been able to reach a solution, and as was the case before, the state was obviously waging a two-tier battle. One, they seemed like they were for a solution. However, at the same time, they were mass arresting. As Ali has mentioned, 9,000 people have been arrested in the past couple of years in the KCK case, which is the Union of Communities in Kurdistan, and over 1,000 people are currently on hunger strike. Today, in Nevroz, over 200 people have been arrested. Nevroz, the Kurdish New Year, is once again being banned. So once again, the Kurds are at a point where resistance, they are saying we will gain our freedom through resistance. So the resistance continues. I wish I could have mentioned the other things as well, but I'm sure you've got the gist of what I was trying to say. Thank you.